we start with the fire procedures. In case of an emergency, there are no planned fire drills during this meeting. If you hear the fire alarm sound, please treat it as a real emergency. Evacuate the building via the nearest safe escape route. The nearest escape route is via the stairs to your left as you leave the council chamber or public gallery. Exit via the door at the back of the building and walk across the inner car park to the evacuation point, which is the pavement opposite the police station. The lifts can't be used in the event of an emergency. Please do not re-enter the building until you've advised it's safe to do so by a member of staff. Apologies and changes of membership. My understanding is Warren Drew is coming. The Councillor Lever sends its apologies. Councillor Brodie has already apologised, and we've had a couple of cabinet members, and I do hope that Councillor Wilcox gets well soon. She seems to have a bug that's hanging around forever at the moment. I think that's it for apology. Declarations of interest. Does anybody have any declarations of interest? Nope. I actually do have a declaration of interest, and I just need to put this to the committee. There is an item on the agenda this evening, on the cabinet agenda, remembering we are not the decision makers on the cabinet agenda, we are just reviewing the cabinet agendas and the papers, so we're not actually making a decision. We can make recommendations. On the section on discretionary rate relief policy, there will be a discussion as part of that will involve private education. I have to declare an interest that I actually pay for a member of my family to go to a private school. As such, I have spoken to Democratic Services, and the suggestion is, as we don't have a vice chair here this evening, that part of the discussion and that part of the meeting, I will sit as just an impartial chair. So I'll stay in the room, but I will make no comment, and I will just bring everybody in and just do my list that you all comment, etc. But I will make no comment whatsoever. Is the committee okay if I deal with that? Otherwise, you're going to have to vote for a new chair for that part of the meeting. Hopefully, you can be happy that I will stay completely impartial on that. Is that okay with the committee? Is that okay? Thank you. I would rather that's not put in the press, as it is a young member of my family. If that's okay. Thank you. Public question time. The public gallery is heaving tonight. Obviously, there's lots of stuff that everybody's interested on the agenda. We haven't had any written questions, and there is nobody in the public gallery, so we will move on to point 4. Point 4 is general exceptions, decisions, and urgent decisions. That's a quickie. We don't have any of those either. If we move on to progress update. Sorry, Councillor Lilly.
Just in the update, you've got about devolution. I believe that the final sort of decision for the submission of devolution has to go to our cabinet on the 20th. It doesn't. There's the final.
Sorry, if it helps, Councillor Lilly, the report that is full council and cabinet next week is local government reorganisation. Devolution will not require a decision of this council until later in the year. The two are separate issues.
There isn't anything linked to the submission that goes to the government on the 21st.
So to give you clarity, we had an agreement from this committee that next week on Tuesday, this committee will sit. We will be discussing only on that evening the schools paper. That will be the only item on the agenda, and it will be made clear that's the only item on the agenda. That we had already voted as a committee that the local government reorganisation will be discussed at full council. So we won't be replicating those discussions, and we won't be putting cabinet members under any extra pressure of repeating themselves, etc. So that discussion on local government reorganisation and the document that you're talking about now will be discussed at full council on the 19th, for then cabinet to make a decision on the 20th. Does that help? Thank you. The other things were the committee's work plan. A question was asked at 12th February cabinet, where it was agreed that the council would seek to mitigate costs. That's all clear, isn't it? And budget and council, a copy of the budget presentation was circulated. So we will move on. Does anybody have any questions on the forward plan 7 to 16? I think a lot of the items on the forward plan we already have in front of us this evening. Councillor Jarman, do you have any questions regarding the forward plan? Nope, none at all. Are we happy to move on to committee's work plan? Committee's work plan is a bit sort of irrelevant at the moment because we will be moving into a committee system. What we have agreed though is this scrutiny committee will sit in April. There was really heavy agendas for March, so it was decided that we would sit in April, make use of the fact that we had another month and we won't be having elections, so we weren't held up by PERDA. So that will be the last meeting of this committee. It would be sad. Not that sad. Right, if we can move on to the review of the cabinet agenda, please. So if you could look to the cabinet papers. The first item on that is school term dates and holiday calendar 2026. Thank you. We have office in the room and we have the cabinet member. Does anybody have any questions regarding school term dates and the holiday calendar? So we're happy to say to cabinet that we've looked and we've read the papers, but we have no issue with that and no questions to raise. Is that okay? So the next thing on the cabinet agenda is post 16 transport policy statement. That is pages on the cabinet agenda 11 to 34. Do any of the committee have any questions regarding that policy? That is it. This is going to be the quickest meeting going if nobody raises any questions. No questions on that. So same as the last one, that we're happy just to say to cabinet that we've read the document and there were no questions raised, so clearly it was satisfactory. Okay, so this is the part of the agenda that I will only be able to sit and chair the meeting. I do have questions, but I'm not going to ask them, and that is discretionary rate relief policy. Councillor Blake.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like a clarification on what we are describing as being a private school. In my ward, I have St Catherine's School, a private institution that provides specialist care for children with EHCPs and SEN care at the extreme end. They're a brilliant institution. They are a charity. Would they be included? Also, would independent preschool providers, nursery providers be included as a private school? I mean, the loose term that has been given to the in the description could be interpreted in other ways. I appreciate that probably not the aim of the paper, but at the moment it's not entirely clear whether it is or not. So if I can first have clarification on that, please.
And thankfully Sharon Betts is here this evening. Are you okay to answer that question?
Yes, I think Councillor Blake is referring to nursery provision, and that would not be included. There are only 2 schools on the island that would be included, and they would be determined as the private schools. So the examples you have given would not be included.
Okay, thank you for that, Sharon. The next question then would be, why are we doing this? It's those they are not exactly Eton and Harrow, those schools. They are local providers of education that that host a whole range of children, including some that are on bursaries, local thing that's not an elitist school. If that was the sort of intention of it, those facilities they provide stuff not just for the children at the school. They're also they provide things for outside bodies to use, such as, for instance, I've done a coaching course at Ride School, for instance, that was hired by a third party provider, and it's a fantastic facility. So it's I would be against anything that hampers those schools' ability to provide exceptional facilities, not just to their own students, but to the wider community. But so if I can have some maybe a direction of why this has come in front of us and why we're talking about it on the cabinet paper, please.
Up on there. Apologies. So as detailed in the executive summary, this is a recommendation from the Ministry of Housing and Communities around the fact of bringing equality, looking at the provision of state schools and public schools. I'm sorry, and private schools. So it's about making sure that the funding arrangements are equitable. So just to cut, maybe I should just add a bit. So at the minute, private schools can claim charitable relief. So we are subsidising their rates bill as part of the charity relief. And what MCLG are saying is that we need to bring equality. The state schools don't get that funding as they do at the minute, as do the private schools at the minute.
Councillor Critchison.
That was my clarification that state schools don't get that discretionary relief, that so they would all be exactly the same, because at the moment we are paying that rate.
Councillor Jarman.
So the charitable parts of those two schools, first of all, I find it very odd that we were bringing in such a measure and a policy that would affect and be targeting only two schools on the whole of the island. So it would only have an effect on the two. But would that policy affect the charitable elements of those schools? I mean, obviously both those schools, well, at least one of those schools I know has a number of sub-elements within it which are charitable concerns. Not only the bursary scheme, but the other charitable issues that they provide. So what we'd be saying is that the charitable organisations under that umbrella, for example, of Wight School, would also not be subject to any relief.
They wouldn't be subject to any rates relief, yeah. We wouldn't be, their charitable status would remain, but the fact that the legislation is to reduce the funding arrangements to the status of that school means that they would no longer receive any reduction in their business rates.
And would we similarly be refusing to provide any rate relief for bodies which might use any of the state schools on the island?
The state schools currently don't receive any of that relief.
No, but some of the organisations that use their facilities do, where they have other premises.
Well, I suppose they would be then in a position where they're renting that space. So we're talking about the actual school body itself. So the school building wouldn't be able to get, or the school organisation would be able to get the discretionary rate relief. But if there was a group that was renting some space in that school for an activity, that would be a matter for the school to charge that out.
Do we have Councillor Drew?
Thank you. I mean, it seems clear that the philosophy behind this is ideological from the government, and it's a question of whether we as a council are implementing that. What I don't understand, and I think this is it is going to found a judicial review on the part of the Independent Schools Trust, is essentially the differentiation between different types of charities, which are essentially Wight School, as far as I'm aware, is a not-for-profit organisation. It is totally charitable, and therefore there is a distinction being made on ideological grounds, and that's absolutely fine. Obviously, the government potentially has a mandate and is introducing primary legislation to reflect that. But my concern lies in the difference between the government and us as a council, because essentially they have primary legislation. We are making a distinction between charities purely based on an ideological notion, whereas other charities will get that rate relief. So my question, I guess, is what legal advice have we taken, particularly with regards to the Independent Schools Trust, which are mounting a judicial review? And my understanding of that is that children at private schools, a considerable number of them, are more likely to have special educational needs because many of their parents choose to send them there. And I think, notwithstanding the somewhat left-wing bias in the media, that actually not all children who attend private schools are from privileged families, but they may have protected characteristics under the Equality Acts. So how do we as a council square that and make sure essentially that we don't fall foul of what could be a successful judicial review in relation to our own policy decisions? Thank you.
I think that would be easier if Wendy Pereira asked that. I think that would be more acceptable than putting all the pressure on to Sharon Betts, especially as Councillor Drew has quite a background in this sort of thing.
Thank you, Chair. And I think there are two things to remember here, really. One is that the paper before you is presented on behalf of the Cabinet member, and it may be that as a committee, your recommendations to Cabinet this evening will be to specifically ask them to consider those points that you've raised and to deal with that in their consideration of this paper on Thursday. And the other issue is that in terms of bringing forward this decision, and we do have Judy Mason on the line, I think, or Judy is available. No? Okay. But in terms of bringing forward this decision, the legislation is in place. The council can determine to do this if they so wish to do so. You're quite right, Councillor Drew. In doing so, they should have undertaken an equalities impact assessment, which they have done in terms of assessing the impact of this proposal coming forward. What you're asking is whether the Cabinet are of themselves assured as far as they can be in terms of making their decision as to whether or not there is any impact that is likely to lead to further legal action on behalf of a third party or a school if this policy comes into being.
Councillor Lilly. Councillor John.
I think it's important fact that the legislation towards private schools has already put forward VAT on fees, and that's had particular sort of effect. So private schools are already, you could say, being charged or charged by the government. I'm in empathy with, I think, what Councillor Blake and Councillor Drew has said. I know particularly about one particular school in Ryde, and it's extremely important to the economy of Ryde. It's actually extremely important to the fact that it gives a huge amount of scholarships out, and you're actually talking about a lot of people within the community that don't actually have much income, or I think, are professions like nurses, etc., that have had children that have not been catered for by the state system, and are actually being catered by that school. I mean, it's quite interesting if you actually ever go and visit the school, the amount of parents actually work in the voluntary sector, the NHS, a lot of the children from dentists and things and whatever, and people on care workers and things that have that. So I also know that that school does a huge amount of voluntary work. Rye Town Council really has benefited on a number of sort of community gardens and facilities of actual young people from that school heavily getting involved. At the same time, I do get the points made by Councillor Christensen raised that actually the equality of the other schools. I think it's a difficult one, but I do think we should put forward some recommendations to look further into really the benefit of those two private schools. I know that the other one mentioned also does a huge amount of scholarships and particularly around sort of special needs. And I think we're not talking about Eton or Harrow. We're talking actually about Indigenous schools on this island that go back a very long way, that are actually part of our culture and heritage. And I think we need to have some sensitivity towards this before a final decision is made.
Thank you, Councillor Lilly. Councillor Jarman.
I think we have to be mindful that we are trying as an island to constantly to undertake regeneration, to attract people to the island, and being able to meet the expectations of some of those people that those schools are able to provide is clearly an important part of attracting them to the island. If we're continually trying to undertake what, as Councillor Drew has alluded to, are politically motivated decisions by putting encumbrances onto those schools, which is likely to increase their fee structure, which is likely to be a deterrent to people coming to the island to fulfill those jobs that we muchly need, then I would question the whole policy. It seems to be completely contrary to our idea of attracting young people, young families with children to the island in a professional capacity. And we're undermining our own future as an island by introducing these retrograde steps.
Committee, could I suggest, as you know, I have to say, completely impartial with this. Can I suggest that one of you makes a recommendation, then we can move to, I won't be to vote, but then the committee can move to a vote on this. Would someone like to say, Councillor John, which of you would like to do it? Make a
Happy to defer to Councillor Jarman.
Councillor Jarman, if you could make a recommendation to the committee, please.
Yes, I'd like the committee to consider making a recommendation to Cabinet that they reconsider the whole basis of this policy and the implications that it may have in terms of our regeneration and our ability to attract families to the island. And on a second point, that they reconsider the very nature of distinguishing between these two schools and other educational establishments on the island, for example, private nurseries. I don't understand why we would apply this to those two particular schools and not apply it to other charitable organisations. It's a discretionary thing that we as a council could do. So the proposal, to summarise it, would be that we refer this to Cabinet with a very strong recommendation that they reconsider the application of this policy with a view to not applying it to those two schools because of the detrimental effect it will have on the island and well, our future regeneration. Thank you.
Councillor Drew, then Councillor Blake.
Thank you. If I may add to that, with Councillor Jarman's indulgence, in the event that there is a recommendation for this to be implemented, that a full equality impact assessment in relation specifically to the islands and looking at the scope and understanding the extent to which those schools as charities, not-for-profit charities, help the local community. And what would be the impacts essentially on their bottom line, their ability to provide scholarships. I don't know if that would be a possibility, but I think that would be some piece of work surrounding that would certainly, to my mind, not only should be done, but I think would probably need to be done as well, I would argue.
Very happy to accept that as a third point as an alteration.
Councillor Blake.
I'd be happy to second Councillor Jarman's motion, but recommendation, sorry, but if in terms for Mel, if it's easy to put option 2 in the recommendations to summarise any of the points that Councillor Jarman's made without taking anything away from his points, and that ought to be taken into account, I think. So option 2 is to allow private schools access to receive discretionary rate relief. At the moment, the recommendations are for option 1 and 3.
Thank you. Can you move to the vote, please? 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That's passed as a recommendation. Thank you. Can I rejoin the meeting now? Councillor Lilly. Sorry, those against? 1, Councillor Richardson. Thank you. If we move on now to the Isle of Wight domestic abuse strategy. Thank you. It's a well presented strategy. Does anybody have any questions on the strategy? Can I just ask, has this strategy been to Adult Social Care Health Committee? It has. So it has had a good discussion on it at that committee as well. Okay. Does anybody from this committee, do we know the recommendation from that committee, please?
The committee sort of agreed to note the strategy at the time, but I believe that Councillor Redrup has since written to the leader expressing further detailed thoughts for them to take on board at their meeting on Thursday.
Okay. And those recommendations then from Councillor Redrup will be discussed at that meeting? Yes? Okay, thank you. Councillor Downer.
Thank you, Chair. That was the last meeting of the Health Committee. Yes, right.
Councillor Lilly.
Yes, I mean, Councillor Redrup wrote in detail to the leader of the council, asking for the report to be withdrawn on the basis that they needed further work. As we've got Councillor Andre there, could we ask her whether it is going to be withdrawn? Because I'm under the belief that it is going to be withdrawn.
Councillor Andre, did you catch Councillor Lee's question? Is the report to be withdrawn on Thursday?
I did indeed catch the question. I can confirm that I have spoken with Councillor Redrup today. I have also spoken with our Director of Public Health, Simon Bryant, and I will not be withdrawing the strategy, but I will be making an announcement at Cabinet, but my decision will be made at Cabinet. But just to reassure you, I am definitely taking on board all of the comments and recommendations that were made by the Health Scrutiny Committee.
Thank you. Are there any further questions on this item? Councillor Blake.
Thank you, Chair. This paper does need some serious looking at. It is a statutory requirement that we have the strategy, but this is not just another strategy though. This is something that has real world implications, and at the moment I certainly agree with Councillor Redrup's conclusions he's drawn to it, that it is not good enough. There is little to no mention of any organisations that provide support. There is definitely a need, I think, for a public consultation on this strategy, and some more referrals to survivor victims, and how we can make this as good as possible, because it needs to be.
Thank you. Councillor Lilly.
I think I'm not a member of the Health Scrutiny Committee, but I did attend the last meeting, and it was very poignant that there was a survivor of domestic abuse at the meeting who gave a very passionate recount of her experience, and the fact that she hadn't had the support on the island. And there was a I think sort of a discussion of that, and I think the concern that Councillor Redrup has as the chair of that committee was there wasn't enough about support for victims. There wasn't enough about actual interventions within that, and also the voice of people didn't seem to be sort of there within the in the strategy, and definitely sort of look for that. And I think that I have to support, I think alongside Councillor Blake, that this committee should actually say that we support the request that that this report needs to have further work and shouldn't be signed off by the cabinet at this stage. Thank you.
Would someone like to make a recommendation? Who would like to word it?
I'm happy to do it. I am happy to recommend that the domestic abuse strategy is withdrawn for further work and consultation. I'd look for a seconder.
I'll second that.
My one question would be, will that leave us without an actual strategy, or it will actually leave us without any strategy whatsoever at the moment? Chief Exec.
So, thank you, Chair. The council doesn't currently have a domestic abuse strategy, and adopting what is before you and what will be discussed at Cabinet would put in place a strategy. I think perhaps the issue to consider is there a point at which you adopt a strategy but accept that there is improvement to be made to that strategy? So one thing that you as a corporate scrutiny body may like to consider is that it may be worthwhile adopting a strategy, but understanding that there's a need for immediate work, for consultation and developing that strategy further.
So no different to our suicide prevention strategy, that everybody accepted that it was not a static document, that we would never be signing off a suicide prevention strategy as a strategy that had to be looked at every 10 years, that actually it was a live document and would be under constant review. So maybe a recommendation to this committee is that we recommend that Cabinet takes into account the comments from the Health Scrutiny Committee and from the very detailed letter from the chair to the cabinet member, which I understand that will happen. But actually our recommendation would be that they adopt the strategy under the understanding that it is not quite there yet. And actually, so we have a strategy in place, but that needs reviewing. And actually, it gets brought back to the new committee at the first sitting of that committee. That gives them a deadline then that they have to. So we have a strategy in place, but actually it goes straight to the committee to be looked at and amendments put in place. Would that be acceptable as a recommendation? Committee, rather than withdrawing something if we don't have a strategy in place?
I take your point, Chair, but I also actually think we have time to, I don't think we should adopt a strategy that is passed by the cabinet and then come back to a committee. I think it should be also the strategy, you have to put in context, so that comes under the responsibility of public health. Public health is now coming back to Isle of Wight Council, and it will be under a new director. And I think so. I stick to my proposal that I think the report at this stage should actually be withdrawn.
That's completely. Are you still happy to second, or?
I've taken on board what you said, Chair, and there does need to be a good strategy, on which this is not. So if we could maybe word something, a bit of a blend of the two, and say that really stress that this is not fit for purpose. And you know, the victim survivors are worried about the implementation of this. I mean, essentially, this should be act as like a user guide for officers to how to deal with these kind of situations. And at the moment, it's not fit for purpose. So I'd be more minded to recommend that we accept it, but really stress the urgentness of this of a rewording to make it fit for purpose.
We seem to have lots of recommendations at the moment. I think we should just move to the vote on Councillor Lilly's. Is everybody happy to move to the vote on Councillor Lilly's? That the proposals on the table, that basically it gets withdrawn and basically made fit for purpose and then brought back to the new health committee as a matter of urgency. So we'll move to the vote, and that being the recommendation.
That would be my recommendation. Yes.
So are you happy to second that still? So currently we're looking for a seconder for that. Councillor Jarman and Councillor Drew are going to second that. So can we move to the vote, please? So that does carry. Abstentions, I will abstain. And against? So 2 abstentions and 1 against. Thank you. So we'll move on to review of the Cabinet Agenda E, the Better Care Fund. My understanding is that Laura Gordian will be able to come online and discuss it. Are you there, Laura? Hopefully. I'm going to give her time because she's not 100% at the moment. Hence, it's very rare, I have to say, for Laura Gordian to not actually be attending one of these meetings in person. So when you say you don't feel 100%, you really don't feel 100%. And we'll hand it over for just a brief on the Better Care Fund for the committee, please.
Of course, thank you very much, Chair. In terms of the Better Care Fund, it will come as no news or surprise to councillors in the council chamber. We've had a Better Care Fund in place for over a decade now, and what it is in essence is a contractual vehicle for the local authority, Adult Social Care Directorate, to share resources and opportunities with our health partners at the ICB. The Better Care Fund for 23 to 25 was rolled over, and in this year government have issued a short Better Care Fund to apply for 1 year only, while they unpick what the Better Care Fund is and try to determine how they want to move forward with that vehicle in the future. Most regrettably, and as is always the case, we have very, very tight timescales around submission of draft plans and plans to central government for their review prior to implementation. And even more unhelpfully this year, we received the guidance only on the 17th of February. So we've got a very short timescale within which to turn around the submission. It has to be in by the end of month, and even shorter because we haven't had the tools to be able to do that. What the committee has in front of it today is the Cabinet paper seeking delegated authority to finalise those arrangements. We've provided within the report as much detail as is available at the moment and continue with our discussions with the Integrated Care Board and pulling together really the documents and the information that we need to finalise that Better Care plan for this year. As I said, submission needs to be in place by the 31st of September, and the formal sign-off comes from the Health and Wellbeing Board. As we've done in previous years, that's done virtually and then goes to the first available Health and Wellbeing Board meeting, and we notified DHSC, the Department of Health and Social Care, that the submission is subject to that ratification and approval. I'm very happy to take any questions that committee members have in relation to the report or the Better Care Fund in general.
Thank you. Councillor Jarman has a question.
I do. I've been monitoring what's happening with the NHS England, under whose auspices this follows. Many will probably have seen the resignation of their Chief Executive Officer and the Chief Medical Officer last week. And in fact, yesterday, they lost their Chief Finance Officer, the Chief Operations Officer, and their Chief Delivery Officer. Not a good day for the organisation. And in combination, they and the Department of Health Directorate have been told to expect 10,000 job cuts, which is roughly 50% of their workforce. It's a surprise to even me, who earlier today was described as a leftist in the press, which I find quite interesting as well. But there we are. No, I'm not looking at anybody in particular, Rufus. Given that this seems to be under the auspices of an organisation which provides, you know, very key health provisioning and health services and grants services to those in society who are most in need, to find out that it's being decimated by a Labour government is quite a surprise. But my question is, to what extent do you feel that all these moves which are happening very quickly now, including so many people being made redundant within their organisations, is likely to impact both this and perhaps other issues that we deal with them on?
Laura Gordian.
Thank you, Councillor Jarman, for your questions. I don't feel it would be appropriate for me to comment at all on staffing decisions being taken by NHS England. The requirement in relation to the Better Care Fund comes from the Department of Health and Social Care rather than just from NHSE, and the requirements have been set for this year. So I think there'll be limited impact on the Better Care Fund arrangements for this year.
Thank you. I would like to recommend to this committee, having dealt with the Better Care Fund for quite a few years, that actually, because of the timescales, we are happy that Cabinet does move to make a delegated decision on this, just because of the tight timescales. I look for a seconder for that. Got lots of seconders. Councillor Lilly, can we move to the vote, please? That's all in favour. Right, we do have another item that isn't noted on your papers in front of you, but it is on the Cabinet agenda, so we should be discussing it. The purchase of 18 units of temporary accommodation in Godsill. And for those that have seen the papers, it will be pages 93. Yes. Yes, so it's on the Cabinet papers. If you get them online, or if you go and get them at the last minute from mail, just because you do them online at home, can't bring your laptop in. It's purchased for 18 units of temporary accommodation in Godsill, and it's pages 93 to 112 if you're looking at online. Does anybody have any questions regarding those papers? Councillor Lilly.
I think it's just one of supportiveness. We have far too many people that are in temporary accommodation, and often that temporary accommodation is not very good. I've definitely had residents who've been, in a family of 4 in a 1-bedroom bed and breakfast within that. So I actually think purchasing actual houses that we can put people in when we have to under statutory requirements is actually a good direction. So I would definitely make a recommendation, and we supported this.
Yeah, I just do have a question of Laura Gordon. I actually know the answer, but actually, because this is a public meeting, I think sometimes it's good to have things, come into this meeting to explain things to the public. So could you explain, please, to the committee, mainly for the public's perception of the type of people that would be moving into those houses once they're purchased, how they will be allocated, how long, as it is temporary accommodation. We read some horrendous things in the media, not from the actual media, I have to say. It's the online keyboard warriors at the bottom saying you'll be shipping in people from other areas of the country to use that accommodation. Could you just give a few myth busters, please, on that temporary accommodation, and how that will reduce our really difficult situation that we have at the moment with housing? I just think it would be really useful. Thank you.
Of course. So in terms of access to temporary accommodation, it's covered within our statutory housing duties. We have a duty to provide temporary and emergency accommodation while we assess somebody in terms of their homeless status. To be able to be part of the Isle of Wight Council's offer in relation to homelessness, we have to establish that you have a local connection and meet the criteria that are set down within the legal framework. we will not be importing people to take up occupancy in these properties. They'll be available for local people, people such as you and I, who for whatever reason find themselves in a position where they've lost stability in their accommodation. We often see families, people who work in our own organisation as well as other organisations, who are made homeless as a result of having been previously in tenanted accommodation that for no fault of their own becomes no longer available to them. So the short answer is the accommodation will form part of the stock that the local authority uses to meet that urgent and emergency need. People will be given the opportunity to reside in those properties until a decision in relation to their homelessness is reached. If they're no longer eligible for our support, they will be required to move on. If they remain eligible for local authority support, they'll retain occupancy of the property until a longer term solution is found for them. So in terms of occupancy duration, I think for me that still remains how long is a piece of string, because we haven't got flow right through temporary accommodation into permanent accommodation offers, and that remains a piece of work that we are committed to achieving as a local authority.
Thank you. I do have to say that the analogy of how long is a piece of string, my grandfather always used to say it depends how much is on the ball. Just saying.
Very true.
Yeah, Councillor Downer.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'd just like to ask where the proposed temporary accommodation is at in Goldhill. Is there any more capacity on the site to put any more units on there? Thank you.
It's part of the new Captiva development that's been created in God's Hill. There are significantly more than 18 units. The 18 units are those that are potentially available to the local authority to purchase.
Councillor Critchison.
Thank you, Chair. I think it's high on the corporate plan that we address some of these issues. So I think we've got to take decisions in that direction. And having seen these properties and know that they have been ready potentially for a while, and it'd be really important to get some people in there that need them. So I support it.
I think I'd like to just recommend to this committee that we all vote to support this, that actually it's a step in the right direction. So do I have a seconder for that? Councillor Downer, can we move to the vote, please? Thank you. Right, we are going to move back to our agenda, and it is the Isle of Wight Community Safety Partnership Annual Report. It is pages 20 to 64 of your scrutiny papers. Does anybody have any questions on that report? Wendy Pereira.
I don't have any questions. That wasn't in answer to your question about questions. We would normally have someone from the Community Safety Partnership present at Corporate Scrutiny. For some reason, we don't have a partnership representative here this evening. I don't think that precludes you from having a conversation and setting out any questions that you have. What I can do is assure you that we'll take those questions away and the partnership will provide responses to you.
I think it would be more appropriate if we could ask in person. And my suggestion is this doesn't have a deadline on it for us to discuss. I think it's much better if we have someone from the partnership. As we have a meeting in April, my recommendation to this committee is this gets moved to the April agenda, and actually we have a representative here. It feels a bit awkward asking questions of fresh air. So I think that would be my recommendation to the committee. I've got a second for Councillor Critchison, that we move that to the April agenda and actually have people here that we can question. Councillor Lilly, are you happy with that recommendation?
I'm happy, but in the past, it wasn't just the relevant sort of officer from the council. You had representative from the police.
That's what Wendy Pereira is saying. There will be representatives from the community partnership that come here in April, and we can question them.
Okay, that's fine.
Yeah, so we're happy with that. Councillor Critchison.
Yeah, I think this kind of partnership working is really important, and it would be good to have the whole panel and have everybody a discussion together with that, because reading through that document, there was lots of really important, good information, the road safety, the crime. It was all really useful. So I think it'd be good to have a bigger discussion. Thank you.
So our recommendation really is to our lovely scrutiny officer, could you arrange for that to be moved to the April agenda, and do your magic and make sure there is as many people as possible from police, everybody who's involved in this. If we could get them along to discuss this would be really good. Wendy Pereira.
I think that is important, Chair, because your responsibility as corporate scrutiny is to be satisfied that the partnership is fulfilling its statutory duty, and you do need people from the partnership here to be able to give you that assurance.
Thank you. We're happy with that. Can we move to the vote? Then we recommend that to happen. Thank you. And that's unanimous. Scrutiny annual report 65 to 74. I would just like to start this saying thank you, Mel, Megan, Marie, all of you that have worked so hard. Scrutiny is brought together by all the different committees, and it really is just them services really that brings it all together. Mel is a genius at bringing everybody together. She's got so much patience. She puts up with me and has a blank face. Even when I'm cracking my best jokes, I don't get her to divulge anything or bend or anything. I do try. So I think the first thing we ought to do as a committee is really extend our thanks, that you have performed an absolutely stunning job, all of you. I think it's really important, and we do understand as a committee, although this is a report that's been put forward, of the absolute importance of scrutiny. And as my 8 years of a councillor, I can say that scrutiny has played a really important role. Having been the other side and being a cabinet member, I really do understand the importance of scrutiny. I do look forward to us moving to a committee system, but I think as a committee we all understand how much work in the background that's taken from all of you within democratic services to actually get us to the point that hopefully will run smoothly from May. So really thank you from all of us, and all councillors who've been involved in all of these committees. It's been really important, and thank you for your time for doing it. You have replaced Paul Thistlewood, which nobody thought could ever happen, and you've done it well. So give yourself a massive pat on the back. Do we have any questions of the scrutiny annual report, or are we happy to just note and having read it? Does anyone have any questions?
I have a question, Chair, but I definitely support your thanks to Melanie, because and Megan and the team, because they have done a fantastic job. They had a very hard act to follow, and they followed it. I think the particular point I wanted to make is that in the change to the committee system, one of the roles of a number of the scrutiny committees is also scrutinising our partners, like the NHS, like the partners that were involved in the community safety. And I think it's important that in the new committee system, we do have time within that committee system to be able to have that scrutiny of those other bodies and have that dialogue, which has been extremely important within that. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's been really made clear through, the work of ordinance and governance, that actually one of the important part is the committees themselves will self-scrutinise because they'll be politically proportionate. But actually, when outside bodies come to those committees, they will be given the right amount of time to make sure that we don't start working in silos and not actually have those outside bodies that we can question. So the committees themselves will self-scrutinise, but actually then the whole committee can then have the outside bodies will be attending and actually having those check and challenge questions as well. So yeah, once again, thank you for all the work you've done. And Councillor Critch.
Sorry, I just thought I'd mentioned the online data as well. That was really useful to see that people were engaging with the web page and online to be able to watch it. And I think that's year on year that's increased, and I think that's a good way to get people involved, the public perhaps as well, and have their comments. They can see what's happening. And
thank you. So the recommendation is that we just note the paper, and we've said our thank you. So I think That is okay for that. Right, we've sped through this evening. Members' questions time. Has any members outside of this committee got any questions? No, there isn't anybody there. As such, I am going to call this meeting to a close. Thank you ever so much for your time. Please remember you need to be back here next Tuesday for the 18th. Hope all your reading is going well. And just assurance to the public, we are attending meetings behind the scenes. Thank you for the time from the education, from Mr. Whitaker and his team for actually spending the time with this committee, going through the documentation that is huge. We're definitely not sat in our laurels. We are doing that check and challenge. So by the time it comes back next Tuesday, we will have all had a chance to actually digest all the information that's been presented to us. So thank you everybody for your time and have a safe journey home. Thank you.